If a man tells you your body, my choice, believe him. Now, trolling was 2016. Now they're bold. Now they know that they have the law and the government on their side. Over 75 million Americans voted to harm you. The men who will tell you, the boys who will tell you, your body, my choice, these are men who will harm you, or at the bare minimum, will stand by as you are being harmed. Please believe them. It is not a joke. They are saying it with their chest. See, the Nick Fuentes misogynistic rant reminded me, as a scholar of peace, conflict, and security, of the Rwandan G-side. Cut down the tall trees. Now, you wouldn't know what this means, but it was the phrase that a radio host, influencer, said that would trigger a call to action of Hutu Rwandans, an ethnic group, and a country in the African continent, to get out their machetes, which were distributed beforehand, head to the streets, and start unaliving over 800,000 people in 100 days. It wasn't just machete unaliving. They would make boys RP their mom or sisters before unaliving them, and then doing the same thing with the women. The central instigator of the Rwandan G-side was a radio station. RTLM, the radio station, regularly called Tutsis cockroaches, with the same tone as Nick Fuentes. Watching that made my skin crawl. It gave me goosebumps because it's the same rhetoric that was used within this conflict. They encourage people to cut down the tall trees in reference to Tutsis. Once the G-side started, the station broadcast the names of people to be unalived and information about where they could be found. A survivor recalls, I remember RTLM broadcasting songs conveying hatred and demonizing the Tutsi. The songs would openly call for our extermination. Political slogans were translated into songs and young people were mobilized into youth movements. These movements were key to executing the G-side. The dehumanization of the Tutsis began in the years before 1994. Same thing with the Holocaust. It began in the years before the actual Holocaust. Everything from getting a job to your freedom of movement was linked to your ID, which stated your ethnic group. Isn't that what Republicans want to do? I remember RTLM broadcasting that something big was going to happen and that the National Army should be on standby to protect the country. Then the G-side started. The chaos started immediately. It was like there was a plan. Roadblocks were put in place within minutes of the crash. By the following morning, people were being stopped both by the army and armed fighters and asked for their ID. This G-side of over 800,000 people in 100 days started by some radio influencers saying, cut down the tall trees. It amplified the tones and emotions that Nick Fuentes literally stated in his misogyny, where he said, your body, my choice. What was the effect of that message that kids went into school and started yelling that out? In every single conflict and every single dictatorship, it is women who have the most damage committed against them. The worst thing that can happen to me is I get unalived. The worst thing that can happen to women is what happened in the Bosnian G-side. An estimated 100,000 people were unalived during the conflict in Bosnia between 1992 and 1995. Here sits a girl at a hospital, 18 years old. She was impregnated as a result of multiple RPs by Serb soldiers at an RP camp. It is estimated that somewhere between 20 and 50,000 women were RP'd during the war in Bosnia. Women were imprisoned in gyms, hotels, abandoned houses, and concentration camps, including also schools. They were RP'd with objects such as guns and truncheons, but also with broken glass bottles to maximize physical damage. She says she was told that there were too many Muslim people and a lot of Muslims were going to give birth to Serbian children. She was kidnapped from a bus station in Belgrade, told the victims, it is better to give birth to Shetniks than to Muslim filth. When a man says, your body, my choice, please believe him. It is not trolling. They feel entitled now. Trolling was the first administration. This time around, they're gonna act. It's always wild when Republicans are arguing about trans women and restrooms, because if we know anything through the rule of law, criminal justice, and just society itself, is that men, we do not have to dress as women in order to RP women. We can do that ourselves as we are, and we can get away with it. Brock Turner, released from jail after serving 3 months for SA. He was literally found behind a dumpster, RPing a girl, unconscious, and he got 3 months. You know why? It was just 20 minutes of fun, right? He had a bright future, right? My expert opinion in international law and specializing in conflict, peace, and security, particularly political violence, social violence, is that all the markers are there for men to begin widespread organized violence against specifically women, more particularly women of color, but also white women in interracial relationships. They will get more bold. I don't think their point is to troll for violence, because historically speaking, when the left, or I guess much more progressives, are threatened, we kind of don't go towards the violent route, unlike the conservatives in MAGA clan who went for an insurrection, right? The reality is that we're not lawfully allowed to overthrow a government. We're just allowed to rebuild it after it dissolves. The reality is that Trump will not need to declare martial law in order to do whatever he wants, because on the day that he is inaugurated, it means that we replace constitutional supremacy with Trump supremacy. That removes the legitimacy of the federal constitution. This means that he's allowed to basically do what he wants, misaligned to the Constitution, because there's no guardrails in order to realign that, right? We especially know that because he has control of Congress, also of the courts, which is why I say in every single dictatorship, there is an illusion that the laws are working, that the Constitution is working, but it's not, because they start to reshape the rule of law through the agencies that they have. That's why I say when the Nazis unalived Jews, that was lawful because it was the rule of law under Nazis. Usually under a dictatorship, they rely on social violence, which is why it's called state-sponsored violence. It is violence that is sponsored by the country, by the government, and a lot of the times they like to disconnect themselves from those institutions, which we saw occurring with Donald Trump in Project 2025. I don't even know anything about that project. I don't know what it is. And then he goes ahead and puts people in his cabinet who are aligned with it. But I cannot emphasize how reckless Trump is capable of being on day one. However, historically speaking, dictatorships usually don't maximize their damage really early on, because that would trigger some sort of response from the people. We like to increase the temperature little by little so that we're actually complacent and we don't realize that our rights are being taken away, which is what he's been doing since his first administration. And look, he got a second term. I think where we have to center ourselves is the fact that the question isn't whether Donald Trump won, but whether his victory is legitimate. And the fact that it's not legitimate because we do not have a legal solution to the question of whether there is legitimacy because of the January 6th things, that means that there is capabilities to dissolve his government even after he's inaugurated. I went through that in my book number 1 and book number 2 list. But I don't want us to think that this is just them trolling, because they were trolling the first time around. This time around, they're serious. So when someone tells you your body, his choice, you believe him. Believe him 1,000%. Because automatically the most severe damage and harm that you will face isn't through the government, but it's through social violence. It's through collectives of people who intend to do you harm. Think of the KKKs who went around black families and set their homes on fire. They don't have to rule in the dark under a Trump presidency, because ultimately we gave him supremacy over the Constitution. And this is why it's so severe for us to at least try to force rectification. It doesn't mean that it's going to be successful. However, on day one of a Trump presidency, no one is safe.